It started with small things. The neighbors joked. At first, strange noises, at night items, moved garbage, knocked over. But I knew it was different. This wasn't raccoons or stray dogs. Something was watching. I worked nights as a security guard, so I often see the woods behind our suburban houses. Normally they're quiet, even in winter. But recently, I've noticed footprints massive, humanoid, and barefoot pressed into the soft ground at the edge of the trees. The first night I saw it, I was checking the perimeter of my property. Shadows moved between the trees. At first, I thought it was a deer. Then I saw the eyes amber glowing faintly in the moonlight. It was massive, taller than any man, broad covered in black fur. Its gaze locked onto mine, intelligent, deliberate. And then it disappeared, leaving only the impression of fear in the snow. Over the next few nights, the sightings became bolder. Footsteps padded silently across lawns. Windows rattled. The air seemed to grow colder, heavier. Sometimes I would wake to the feeling of being watched, even when I was alone inside my house. I tried to warn my neighbors, but most laughed it off. A few admitted they had seen something moving in the trees, but none of them could describe it clearly. I realized the truth slowly. The creature wasn't just in the forest. It was learning, observing, patrolling, and it wasn't afraid of humans. One night, I stepped outside to check the backyard after hearing a loud crash. Snow crunched beneath my boots. The moonlight caught something moving along the tree line. Massive arms swinging with deliberate rhythm. Black fur brushing against the trunks. I froze. It stopped. Amber eyes glinted from the shadows. Its head tilted as if studying me, calculating. I realized then it wasn't just a wild animal. It was intelligent, patient, and methodical. I backed inside, slowly locking the door. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't stop. It was no longer confined to the forest. It was watching, stalking, and learning how to move among humans. The nights became unbearable. Every creak of the house, every rustle of wind, made my heart jump. I could feel its presence, even when I couldn't see it. The creature wasn't hiding, it was studying, waiting for the perfect moment. I started noticing the footprints closer to the houses, not just at the edge of the woods. Barefoot, massive, and deliberate. Some led to my own backyard. Others disappeared into the night, as if it was patrolling marking territory. One night, I decided to stay awake, watching through my window. I barely breathed as I saw a shadow slip through the trees. Its movement was too fluid, too deliberate to be an animal. Then I saw the eyes amber glowing faintly in the moonlight. It paused, scanning the yard, almost as if it knew I was watching. And then with unnatural silence, it stepped forward, moving closer to the house. My chest tightened. It wasn't hunting for food. It was observing, testing boundaries, seeing how humans reacted. The neighbors weren't safe either. The next day, one mentioned strange scratches on their fence, deep gouges in patterns that didn't make sense. Another complained of broken windows and items moved around their yard. It wasn't random. It was intelligent. I realized this wasn't about survival. This was about control. The creature was teaching us fear, one calculated step at a time. That night, I heard a soft tapping at the back door. I froze. Every hair on my body stood on end. Slowly, I approached, flashlight trembling in my hand. Nothing. Just the snow-disturbed, slightly footprints leading back toward the woods. But when I turned to go inside, a shadow moved past the window. Massive, silent watching. I barely caught the glint of amber eyes before it melted back into the darkness. I understood then I couldn't fight it. I couldn't trap it. I could only survive. Each night became a test. Each sound, each movement, a reminder. The creature was always learning, always stalking, and it would not rest until it had left its mark on every mind in the neighborhood. I never expected it to come this close. The night was still, the streetlights casting weak pools of yellow across the snow-covered lawns. I had barely slept in days, anxiety gnawing at my every thought. Then I heard a soft, deliberate thud outside my window. I froze. The hairs on my arms stood on end. Slowly, I crept to the window and peered through the blinds. There it was, massive, taller than any man, black fur blending seamlessly into the shadows. Its amber eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the dim streetlight. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. It was watching, calculating, learning. I wanted to call someone, but the moment I touched the phone, a loud crash came from the backyard. My blood ran cold. The creature had moved silently faster than I thought possible from the side of the house to the back. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside, trying to keep it between us. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I had to stay calm. The snow crunched under my boots and the creature paused, tilting its head as if studying me. Its presence was oppressive, intelligent, deliberate. It wasn't attacking yet. It was testing boundaries, observing reactions, instilling fear. I backed toward the house, shining the flashlight. It stepped closer, its massive frame towering above me. I could see the details, now thick, matted fur, long, powerful arms, enormous hands. Its amber eyes never left mine. Then, almost casually, it vanished into the shadows. No noise, no trace, just the lingering terror. The next day, the neighbors whispered about scratched doors, missing pets, and odd footprints in their yards. It was everywhere, silent, calculating, patient. The neighborhood had become a cage, and the creature was the warden. I realized then that it wasn't random. It wasn't hunting for food. It was experimenting, observing, breaking our sense of safety, making us prey to fear itself. I barricaded my doors and windows, but sleep refused me. Every shadow, every rustle, every whisper of the wind reminded me it was there. Watching, always watching. I had survived the close encounter, but the creature had already won. The fear it planted would linger, infecting my every thought, my every movement, and every night to come. The nights had become unbearable. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't think straight. Every sound, the creak of a door, the rustle of leaves, even the faint hum of a distant car made my heart pound. The creature was no longer just a forest predator. It had adapted to the suburban streets, hunting fear as methodically as a wolf hunts prey. I heard footsteps on the roof one night, slow, deliberate, each step heavier than a human could manage. I froze, clutching a baseball bat, staring at the ceiling, praying it was my imagination. But the sound persisted, circling above, taunting. I ventured outside to check. The street was empty. The snow glistened under the pale moonlight. And then I saw it, its massive silhouette standing between two streetlights, eyes glowing amber-black fur blending into the night. It didn't move at first. It didn't roar. It just stood there, watching, studying, deciding what to do next. The wind shifted, carrying the faint smell of wet fur and earth. My stomach turned. It was intelligent, calculating, patient, and it knew I could see it. Over the next nights, the creature grew bolder. Mailboxes were ripped open, fences torn apart. Small animals disappeared, and neighbors whispered about missing items and strange footprints. No one slept well. The entire neighborhood was under siege, and the fear was contagious. I could see the toll it was taking on the residents, eyes darting nervously. Doors bolted, early children sleeping in parents' beds. The creature wasn't just hunting, it was breaking the community, isolating us, making us prey to our own paranoia. One night I saw it closer than ever. It emerged from the shadows behind my neighbor's house. Massive, arms swinging, muscles tensed, amber eyes fixed on me. I realized I had a choice: stay frozen and hope it left, or move and risk drawing its attention. I ran through backyards, over fences, slipping on snow and ice. Its footsteps followed, slow, patient, relentless. I could hear my own ragged breathing and the pounding of its massive frame behind me. For the first time, I understood this creature wasn't just a beast. It was a predator of fierce intelligence, guiding every move, every decision, testing the limits of human courage and sanity. I finally made it back inside, barricading doors and windows. My body shook. I realized survival wasn't just about escape. It was about endurance, outlasting it. But deep down, I knew the creature didn't need to attack physically to win. Its victory was already assured. The neighborhood was terrified. The creature had shown us that it was here, patient, unstoppable, and always watching. The neighborhood had become a ghost town of fear. Families stayed inside doors, bolted windows, shuttered lights burning all night. But I knew it wasn't enough. The creature didn't need the darkness to strike. It thrived on our terror, our paranoia, our inability to feel safe. I decided to confront it. I couldn't live like this, constantly watched, hunted by a shadow with intelligence beyond comprehension. Armed with nothing but a flashlight and my own courage, I stepped into the night. The streets were silent, unnervingly so. Footprints crunched under my boots, not mine, but larger, heavier. I followed them toward the edge of the woods bordering the neighborhood. And there it was, massive, imposing black fur, blending perfectly into the night. Its amber eyes glowed, faintly, watching, assessing. I shouted, trying to scare it off, but it didn't flinch. It didn't roar. It simply stood there, towering over me, calculating every move I made. I realized then that physical confrontation was futile. Its power wasn't in its strength, but in its control over me, over the neighborhood, over the fear it had instilled. I backed away slowly. The creature followed silently, deliberately teaching me that even movement could be dangerous. Every instinct screamed to run, but I knew I could not outrun it in the woods, in the snow, in the darkness. The only choice was retreat. I returned to my house trembling. The neighborhood remained eerily quiet, the air thick with unspoken terror. I looked outside one last time. There it was, perched atop a hill at the forest edge, amber eyes glowing, watching every house, every movement, every human thought. It didn't need to attack. It had already won. From that night on, life continued, or at least a semblance of it. Families ventured out in daylight. Children played cautiously, and the town whispered stories of the creature. But I knew the truth. It was still there, intelligent, patient, and relentless. The creature's victory was silent. It didn't roar. It didn't kill. It simply claimed dominion over fear, teaching humans the fragility of safety, the power of paranoia, and the inescapable shadow that lurks just beyond sight. And somewhere in the woods it waits, watching, waiting, learning. I survived. But I will never forget the amber eyes. I will never forget the silent victory. I never believed in Bigfoot. Not really. Not until the night we called it. They told me the stories like everyone else hears them. Half-drunk tales whispered around campfires, blurry photos on the internet, footprints stamped into soft earth. But I'm a man of science. I deal in facts, in evidence. I don't scare easily. That's why I agreed to join Project Alder. It was supposed to be a field study, an academic investigation into folklore in the Pacific Northwest. Our team was small, 4 anthropology grad students, 1 professor, and me, a skeptic journalist looking for a good story. We were going to spend 2 weeks deep in the Pine Creek forest, interviewing locals and documenting myths. But then Professor Langley showed us something that changed everything. It was the 3rd night at base camp when he called us into the tent. His hands were shaking, his eyes bright with a feverish excitement I'd never seen in him before. On the table lay an old leather-bound book, its cover cracked and flaking with age. "I found this," he whispered, "in a private collection in Oregon. Pre-colonial, indigenous origin. But it describes something far older than any tribal myth." The pages were filled with symbols, spirals, clawed footprints, crude sketches of towering figures with glowing eyes. And beneath them, in faded English, a translation: "When the forest is dying, call to the first walker. When the earth forgets, awaken the watcher. Speak its name beneath the full moon, and the world will remember." Langley believed this was the earliest known reference to Bigfoot, not as a creature, but as a guardian. A first walker who had roamed the forests since before mankind learned to speak. And he was convinced that with the right ritual, we could summon it. I laughed. Of course I did. It sounded ridiculous, like a campfire story gone too far. But the others, they were fascinated, enthralled. Even Samantha, our most logical team member, seemed convinced. "Think about it," she said. "If the legends are rooted in something real and we have a documented ritual to contact it, this could be the greatest anthropological discovery of the century." And so, against my better judgment, I agreed to help. We chose the night of the harvest moon, the date the book specified. We hiked 5 miles from camp to a clearing surrounded by ancient pines, a place the locals called the Old Hollow. Langley said it was the oldest part of the forest, untouched for centuries. We built a circle of stones, lit torches, soaked in cedar oil, and arranged offerings of berries, bones, and blood, just as the book described. At midnight, we began the chant. It started as a whisper, then a murmur, then a steady rhythm rising from 6 human throats into the still night air. The forest seemed to listen. The wind died. The crickets fell silent. Even the stars above looked sharper, colder. I remember laughing nervously at first. Then the ground started to hum. It was subtle, a low vibration like a distant train. Then stronger, then louder. The trees swayed, though no wind blew. Shadows lengthened across the clearing, twisting into shapes that didn't match the flames that cast them. "Keep going," Langley shouted over the roar. "It's working." And then I heard it, a sound I will never forget. A deep, guttural breath, like the forest itself inhaling. The torches exploded into a sudden, violent blaze. Samantha screamed. The air grew hot, too hot, and the scent of pine gave way to something acrid and rotten. And in the darkness beyond the circle, something moved. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't an elk. The shape was too tall, too broad. It walked on two legs, its silhouette merging with the shadows as though it was the shadow. My heart slammed against my ribs. "It's here," Langley whispered, his voice trembling with awe. Then the chanting stopped, not because we wanted it to, but because we couldn't speak. Every one of us was frozen. Our throats locked. Our bodies refused to move. And from the edge of the clearing, two eyes burned through the dark amber and ancient, filled with intelligence. And something far, far worse, recognition. It stepped forward, 8 feet tall, maybe more, its body draped in matted fur, its chest heaving with every breath. Its face, God, its face was not animal. It was almost human, a grotesque parody of a man with a heavy brow and a mouth that curled into something like a smile. And then in a voice that sounded like it came from the trees themselves, it spoke a single word: remember. The world went black. I woke up on the forest floor. The torches were gone. The circle of stones was shattered. And the moon, the full golden moon, was nowhere to be seen. Only blackness, cold, absolute blackness pressing in from every side. At first, I thought I was alone, but then I heard the others breathing. Samantha was lying a few feet away, her eyes wide open, but unfocused, whispering something over and over again under her breath. Langley sat slumped against a tree, muttering nonsense in a language I didn't recognize. Jared was on his knees, staring up at the empty sky as if he could still see something there. "Where? Where is it?" I croaked. No one answered. And then I felt it, a burning, searing pain in the center of my chest. I ripped open my shirt and gasped. There was a mark etched into my skin. A spiral, perfectly circular, raised like scar tissue, but fresh as if carved into me from the inside. And I wasn't the only one. Each of us bore the same symbol. We stumbled back to camp before dawn, half delirious, half crazed. Langley kept muttering, "We did it. We did it," like a man possessed. Samantha wouldn't stop shaking. Jared vomited 3 times and refused to speak. I wanted to believe it had all been some sort of mass hallucination. Maybe we'd inhaled too much cedar smoke. Maybe the forest had played tricks on us. But the marks on our bodies were real, and the worst part was what came with them. The dreams. That night, when I closed my eyes, I was back in the clearing. But this time, I wasn't watching, I was standing beside it. The creature, the first walker, Bigfoot. Its breath hot against my neck, its voice a low growl vibrating through the marrow of my bones. Remember. In the dream, I felt my lips move. Words poured out, not my own, but ancient and alien. Promises, oaths, submission, and when I woke up, I could still hear the echo of that voice in my head. By the third day, the forest had changed. At first, it was subtle trails we had marked were gone, replaced by unfamiliar paths. Then came the whispers. Low, unintelligible sounds that floated on the wind, too rhythmic to be random. And the animals, they watched us. Deer stood still and silent as statues when we passed. Ravens followed us from the tree to tree, never blinking. Something in Pine Creek had woken up. Langley was ecstatic. "We've made contact," he kept saying. "It's not just a creature, it's a consciousness, a guardian, and it's aware of us now." But Samantha wasn't convinced. She started talking about leaving, about burning the book, and never speaking of this again. That night she tried. She packed her gear and slipped into the trees while the rest of us slept. She never came back. We searched for 2 days. Nothing. No footprints, no torn clothes, no blood. Just gone. Like she'd stepped off the face of the earth. And then on the third night, I had another dream. I saw Samantha, or what was left of her. She was walking through the forest, barefoot and silent, her eyes glowing faintly amber. She moved with purpose, not as a captive, but as something reborn. And behind her in the darkness, it walked, watching, guiding. I woke up screaming. Jared did too. He'd seen the same dream. By the end of the week, we were breaking apart. Jared stopped eating. Langley started carving the spiral symbol into the trees around camp, chanting under his breath like a priest. As for me, I could hear the voice even when I was awake now. It spoke in fragments like a memory resurfacing. "You called me. You offered. Now you serve." I wanted to run. I tried once sprinting blindly through the pines until I collapsed from exhaustion. But no matter which way I turned, the forest bent. Paths looped back on themselves. Landmarks vanished. And always in the distance, I saw eyes watching me between the trees. We hadn't summoned a guardian. We had bound ourselves to it. The final straw came on the 10th night. Langley gathered us around the fire, his eyes hollow and feverish. "It's almost complete," he whispered. "The pact. One more offering, and the first walker will accept us." "What offering?" I demanded. His smile was slow and terrible. "Blood." That's when I realized the ritual wasn't over. The summoning was just the beginning, and the creature, whatever it was, hadn't finished with us. It was waiting, watching, hungry. I don't remember when I stopped believing we'd get out of that forest. Maybe it was after Samantha vanished. Maybe it was when the compass needles started spinning aimlessly. Or maybe it was the night Langley said almost calmly, "One of us must die." The words hung in the cold air like a noose. We were sitting around a dying fire, hollow-eyed and filthy. The food was gone. The map made no sense anymore. Days and nights blurred into one long, oppressive twilight. Langley's voice was a rasp hoarse from chanting, from praying, to something we no longer understood. "The pact demands balance," he murmured. "It gave us knowledge. It gave us presence. Now it needs flesh." "That's insane," Jared snapped. "We're not killing anyone." Langley just smiled. "We don't have to. It will choose." And with that, he walked into the darkness, leaving us with the fire, the silence, and the growing certainty that we were no longer alone. That night, Jared disappeared. No screams, no struggle. One moment, he was asleep in his tent, The next, his sleeping bag was empty, and the ground around it was covered in those massive humanoid footprints. We followed them at dawn. They led us deep into a part of the forest we'd never seen before, a place where the trees twisted together so tightly the light could barely reach the ground. And there, in a small clearing, littered with animal bones and strange totems, we found what was left of him. Not his body, his clothes, folded neatly, arranged carefully. And next to them, carved into the dirt, was the same spiral symbol that marked our chests. Langley fell to his knees. It accepted the offering, he whispered. I wanted to hit him, scream at him, but deep down, I knew he was right. Something had taken Jared, and whatever it was satisfied. We should have run then. We should have tried. But the forest wasn't a place you could leave anymore. It had shifted a living labyrinth of roots and shadows that responded to our every move. When we tried to head east, we circled back west. When we followed the sun, it vanished behind endless canopies. The truth settled on me slowly. Like a disease, the forest wasn't just influenced by the thing we summoned. It was it. The trees, the wind, the silence, they all answered to the first walker. We were inside its domain, and it was watching every second. And it wasn't finished. The next night, the dreams returned worse this time. I saw Jared again, but he wasn't Jared. His body was taller, broader, his skin dark and rough. His face was stretched into something that was almost human, almost beast. He stood among the trees, eyes glowing faintly, and when he spoke, his voice wasn't his own. One by one, you called us back. I woke up with blood on my hands. At first, I thought it was my own, a nosebleed, a cut. But then I saw Langley lying a few feet away, a gash on his arm, and his face twisted into a look of fear. You tried to kill me, he whispered. I shook my head, terrified. I didn't, I swear. But even as the words left my mouth, I wasn't sure. I couldn't remember what I'd done after falling asleep. I couldn't remember anything. Langley didn't trust me after that, and I didn't trust him. We stayed awake in shifts, our backs to each other, hands close to our knives. The forest was breaking us, twisting our minds, just as it twisted the world around us. 2 nights later, Langley was gone. No footprints, no signs of struggle. Just the spiral burned into the ground where he'd been sleeping. And this time, I didn't feel fear. I felt relief. The pact was being paid, piece by piece. And now, I was the only one left. I tried to believe. That meant I'd be spared. That the first walker had taken what it needed. But that night, the voice returned not in my dreams, but in the waking dark just beyond the edge of the firelight. One remains. One must become. The trees shivered. The wind carried words I almost understood. And when I looked down at the spiral on my chest, it wasn't a scar anymore. It was glowing. I screamed. I clawed at my skin until it bled. But the light only grew brighter, pulsing with every beat of my heart. And somewhere in the darkness, something enormous stirred footsteps that shook the earth, a breath that smelled of rot and rain. It was coming for me, not to kill me, but to change me. It started with the fever, a slow, creeping heat that spread beneath my skin, burning deeper than any sickness I'd ever known. My vision blurred. My heartbeat thundered like a drum in my chest, and the spiral carved into my flesh throbbed with every pulse alive, hungry. I stumbled through the forest like a drunk, clutching at tree trunks that seemed to lean toward me, their bark pulsing like veins. The air felt thicker now, almost liquid, and every breath carried the same sound, a low, rhythmic whisper that wasn't quite a word yet. I understood it perfectly. One must become. One must remember. I don't know how long I walked. Hours, days. Time didn't exist anymore, only the pull dragging me deeper into the heart of Pine Creek. The forest guided me. I could feel it in my bones. My feet knew where to go, even when my mind did not. And then I found the clearing again, the place where we had performed the ritual, the birthplace of all this horror. But it wasn't empty anymore. They were waiting for me, shapes in the mist, shadows towering over the trees, eyes, dozens of them, glowing amber in the darkness. And among them, faces I recognized. Samantha, Jared, Langley, or what was left of them. Their bodies were grotesquely changed, elongated limbs, hunched backs, skin coarse and furred. Their faces were still theirs in some small way, but warped into something older, heavier, primal. They watched me silently, reverently, as though they had been waiting all along, and behind them it stepped into view. The first walker, 8, maybe 9 feet tall. Its fur glistened like oil in the moonlight. Its eyes burned with an ancient intelligence that felt older than language itself. When it spoke, it was not with a voice, but with the vibration of the forest, the rustle of the leaves, the sigh of the earth beneath my feet. You called, you offered, now you will remain. I tried to scream, tried to run, but my body wasn't mine anymore. My legs carried me forward, one step at a time, until I was standing before it. The thing I had once mocked as a myth, now towering over me like a god carved from bone and shadow. It reached out one massive clawed hand and pressed it against the spiral on my chest. Pain, white-hot, blinding pain, shot through every nerve in my body. My spine arched. My lungs seized my scream, caught somewhere deep in my throat. And then the pain changed, became something worse. I felt myself unraveling. My bones groaned, bending under impossible pressure. My skin split and reformed, thickening, darkening. My teeth ached, stretching into points. My senses exploded the heartbeat of a bird 100 yards away, the scent of blood beneath the soil, the whisper of wind on distant mountains. I collapsed, gasping, trembling, weeping. And when I opened my eyes, the forest breathed with me. Do you see? The voice asked, not from the creature, but from inside my own mind. Yes, I whispered. I see. I understood now. The first walker was no animal, no monster. It was a memory, the memory of the world before humans, before steel and fire. It had been called many names across the ages, but its purpose had never changed: to guard the wild, to keep the balance. And those who called it became part of it. We weren't victims. We weren't sacrifices. We were vessels. When I looked down at my hands, they were no longer human. Long, thick fingers, tipped with black claws. My breath steamed in the cold night air, heavy and powerful. I felt strong, stronger than I had ever been. The others stepped closer, Samantha, Jared, Langley, and they bowed their heads slightly, not out of fear, but in welcome. And then in unison, they spoke, voices deep and resonant as one. One must become. One must remember. And I did. I don't know how many centuries have passed since that night. Time means nothing now. The world above changes. Cities rise and fall. Forests are cut down. Men forget. But we remain, watching, waiting, walking the pines as we have since the beginning. People still whisper stories about us. They call us monsters, legends, Bigfoot. But they're wrong. We are not beasts. We are the memory of the wild. We are what you called. And soon, when the forests are gone and the balance is broken again, you will call us once more. It's been 47 years since the last disappearance in Pine Creek. At least, that's what the newspaper said when I first arrived here, a curious journalist chasing old legends. I came with a camera, a notebook, and the sort of arrogance that only someone who doesn't believe in monsters could have. I wasn't here for the trees or the air. I came for a story, and God help me, I found one. The cabin was the first clue, half buried, beneath moss and rot. It looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. The wood was splintered and swollen from rain, the door sagging on a single hinge. Inside I found scraps of life, frozen in time, rusted lanterns, shattered glass, an old typewriter still loaded with a half-finished page. And then I found the journal. It was wrapped in oilcloth, beneath a loose floorboard, the pages damp and yellowed with age. At first, it seemed like the ramblings of a man going mad. Fever dreams about rituals, voices in the forest, something ancient, watching from the pines. But as I read deeper, I realized it wasn't madness. It was a confession. The entries described everything in meticulous, horrifying detail. The spiral carved into the earth, the chanting, the disappearances, the names of the people who'd gone missing. They matched the records I had gathered. All except one, the author himself. He never signed his name, not once. But the way he wrote, it was as if he wanted someone, anyone, to understand what had truly happened here. And then on the final page, his words changed. The madness fell away. The handwriting grew steadier, almost calm. The forest does not forget. We are not lost. We are not dead. We walk as we always have in the shadows between breath and bark. When the world forgets the old ways, we will remind them. I remember staring at those lines for hours, trying to decide whether I was reading the truth or the ramblings of a man who had long since lost himself to the woods. I decided to leave, but the forest had other plans. The first night back in town, I dreamed of amber eyes in the dark. The second night, I heard footsteps pacing the edge of my campsite. By the third night, I woke to find spirals drawn in the dirt around my tent, not with a stick, but with fingers. I told myself it was kids a prank, maybe locals trying to scare the outsider. But deep down, I knew the forest had seen me. It knew I had read his words, and now it was watching. I never published the article. How could I, who would believe that Bigfoot, the punchline of every backwoods joke, was something far older, far more deliberate, that they weren't beasts, but keepers of something sacred and forgotten. Instead, I kept the journal locked away, telling myself I'd come back when I had proof. That was 6 years ago. And now tonight, I stand once again beneath the black canopy of Pine Creek, the journal heavy in my backpack, the trees whispering my name in the wind. The moon is low. The spiral clearing is ahead. Something calls to me from the dark. And as I step into the circle, I finally understand what the man who wrote this journal meant when he said, "One must become, one must remember." The wind stops, the forest exhales, and somewhere beyond the tree line, something stirs. It isn't a roar, it isn't a growl. It's a sound older than language, older than fear, the heartbeat of the world before us calling its children home. And for the first time, I'm not afraid. I close my eyes and I answer. Winter had arrived earlier than expected that year. The mountains were already blanketed in thick snow, turning the forest into a silent, frozen world. I was alone, a volunteer for the local ranger team, tasked with checking trails and maintaining cabins in the high-altitude region. The job was lonely, but I liked it. Peaceful, predictable, until the tracks appeared. At first, I thought it was a prank. Massive footprints, far too large to belong to a human or any known animal. The snow around them was pressed down deep and heavy. They began at the trailhead and led into the forest, disappearing among the thick pines. I took photos and radioed the base. "Probably a bear," one of the rangers said. "Those snow prints can look bigger than they are." But I knew better. Something about their shape was wrong. Too long, too wide, barefoot. And the stride, it was almost human, but impossible. That night, I stayed in a small ranger cabin near the trailhead. The wind howled outside, making the wooden walls creak. I thought I was imagining it when I heard a faint crunching of snow outside. Slow, deliberate, not random. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside. The moonlight reflected off the snow, illuminating a row of enormous footprints leading toward the cabin. My heart stopped. Someone or something had circled the building. A low guttural growl rolled through the trees. Deep, resonant, too heavy for any bear. I slammed the door shut and barricaded it with a bench. My radio crackled, but no one answered. It was as if the mountains themselves had swallowed every signal. By dawn, the footprints had vanished, but the sense of being watched lingered. Every time I stepped outside, the crunch of snow somewhere in the distance made me jump. Over the next few days, I discovered more signs, broken branches in impossible patterns, trees scratched with long, deep gashes and remnants of food caches, deer bones torn apart and arranged neatly. Whoever or whatever had made the tracks was intelligent. It was aware. It was planning. I decided to follow the tracks deeper into the forest. A mistake I would soon realize. The footprints led me to a frozen creek, and then the snow stopped. No tracks forward, no tracks back. Only silence. And then I heard a low, whispering breath from the other side of the ice. A shape loomed in the shadows, massive, covered in dark fur. Its eyes caught the faint light burning amber in the cold air. I froze. The creature didn't move. It just watched. And for the first time in my life, I understood what real fear meant. I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the cabin, every gust of wind through the frozen trees made my heart jump. I kept seeing those amber eyes in my mind, burning through the darkness, watching, waiting. By morning, I knew I couldn't stay. The creature was still out there. It had circled the cabin last night. It had learned my routine. I had to move before it decided to strike. I packed lightly a small pack with water, a radio, and my survival knife. My plan was simple. Follow the tracks further into the forest, document them, and try to find an escape route to the lower valley. The snow crunched under my boots as I walked. The tracks were faint but clear, leading into the dense pine forest. Branches scraped my face, and the wind seemed to whisper my name. I tried to convince myself it was paranoia, but deep down I knew better. Hours passed. Every time I stopped to rest, I felt it. A presence. Behind a tree, between boughs, somewhere in the distance. A shadow that didn't belong to the trees. I finally saw it, barely fleetingly moving through the snow. Massive shoulders, black, matted fur eyes glowing like fire in the distance. I froze, hoping it hadn't noticed me. It had. I heard a low growl, almost a warning. The snow beneath it compressed as it stepped forward, leaving new footprints beside the old ones. It was following me, not running, not attacking, just stalking. My heart pounded. Every instinct screamed to run, but I remembered the forest from earlier. Running blindly would only lead me into a trap. I slowed my pace, keeping trees between us. By late afternoon, I came across a clearing, a small frozen pond. The tracks stopped here. I scanned the tree line. Nothing. I exhaled slowly, thinking maybe I had lost it. Then I heard crunching behind me. I turned. It was closer now. Its massive form, partially hidden by fog, but unmistakable. The shape of its head, the length of its arms, the power in every step it moved, with a predator's confidence. Not a mindless animal, not even a wild beast. Something more, something intelligent. I stepped back, slipping on ice. The creature's eyes followed me. My fingers clutched my knife tighter. Then suddenly it vanished. No sound, no movement, nothing but the snow. I exhaled in relief, foolish, fleeting relief, because I knew the truth. It hadn't gone anywhere. It was watching, always watching. I continued cautiously, following the creek downstream, hoping for any sign of civilization. But the forest seemed to shift around me. Tracks appeared and disappeared, trees leaning as if blocking my path. Every so often, I would see those amber eyes, reflecting from a distance, always keeping pace, always reminding me it was there. By nightfall, I was exhausted. I found a small grove and tried to make a temporary shelter, piling snow and fallen branches for cover. My body ached. My mind raced. The sounds of the forest seemed amplified, a branch snapping here, a distant howl there. And beneath it all, the soft, deliberate crunch of snow, the creature circling me. I didn't dare sleep. Hours later, I caught movement in the corner of my vision. It was standing at the edge of the clearing, partially hidden by trees. Its eyes glowed, piercing the darkness. It didn't run, it didn't attack, it just stared, and I realized I wasn't being hunted randomly. I was being taught fear, being measured, being studied, and I had no idea what it intended to do next. The night was endless. I huddled beneath my makeshift shelter, shivering not from the cold, but from the knowledge that it was out there. Every crunch of snow, every distant snap of a branch sent jolts of panic through me. I barely ate, barely moved, barely breathed. The forest had transformed from a silent, frozen world into a living nightmare. I could feel it watching. I could almost hear it thinking. It wasn't like an animal. It was intelligent, methodical, learning my patterns. Every step I took, every pause, it seemed to know. By dawn, exhaustion had made me reckless. I stumbled through the snow, following a faint trail that might have led to the valley below. The tracks weren't just footprints anymore. There were impressions of massive hands pressed into the snow, as if the creature had tested the ground or measured me. Then I saw it clearly up ahead, towering black, furred, unmoving. Its amber eyes locked on mine. I froze. It didn't lunge. It didn't growl. It just waited. I realized it wanted me to make the first move. I tried to back away slowly. The snow crunched beneath my boots. It tilted its massive head, slightly studying me, its chest rising and falling with a terrifying calmness. Then, without warning, it charged, not like a wild animal, but like a predator, testing me. I dodged behind a tree. The impact of its massive body shook the snow from the branches. My heart pounded in my ears. Every instinct screamed to run, but where the forest stretched endlessly in every direction. I scrambled over a fallen log, knife raised, but it anticipated every move. Its speed was impossible, its strength unmatched. It cornered me near a cliff edge, snow and ice giving way beneath my feet. The forest fell silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The creature circled me, slow, deliberate, measuring, watching my fear. Its eyes burned with an intelligence that was almost human, but not. Its face, elongated and grotesque, showed no malice, only control. I realized then that it wasn't hunting for food. It was hunting for dominance, terror, submission. It wanted me alive, but broken. I made a desperate move, stabbing my knife toward its chest. It swatted me aside effortlessly, and I landed hard in the snow, sliding dangerously close to the cliff. I could hear its heavy breathing, soft, guttural, deliberate, as it stepped closer. Then something unexpected happened. It stopped. Its amber eyes studied me, tilted its head, and turned away. Slowly, silently, it melted back into the forest. I sat there for hours, shaking snow, melting into my clothes, staring at the empty clearing. I didn't understand why it had spared me. Perhaps it had learned enough. Perhaps it was testing me. I had survived the night, but my mind felt shattered. Every sound, every shadow, every whisper of the wind now carried the terrifying possibility that it was still there, watching, waiting. By morning, I staggered downhill, desperate to reach the nearest ranger station. But I knew one truth etched deep into my mind. The creature wasn't just a monster. It was the forest itself. And it remembered me. The forest seemed endless. After the creature vanished into the trees, I didn't dare rest. Every step downward through the snow-covered pines felt like wading through a nightmare. My legs burned. My lungs screamed for air. But the only thing driving me forward was the thought of reaching the valley and surviving. Every so often, I would hear it again, soft crunching in the snow, a shadow flitting between trees. The amber eyes I had hoped were gone, still watching me from the distance. I began to notice small details, footprints that weren't mine. Broken branches, placed as if guiding or corralling me. Snow mounds pressed into shapes that almost looked like hands. It wasn't just a chase anymore. It was a lesson in terror. By late afternoon, exhaustion set in. My vision blurred and the cold gnawed at my fingers and toes. I stumbled over a fallen log and landed hard in the snow. As I pushed myself up, I noticed something: an unnatural silence. No wind, no birds, not even the occasional rustle of wildlife. Then I heard a low, deliberate growl behind me. I spun, knife raised, but saw only fog and trees. The growl grew closer, circling me like a predator, savoring its prey. My breath came out in ragged clouds, freezing instantly in the cold air. My mind raced. Every rational thought I had was gone. Only fear remained. Hours passed. I began to hallucinate. The trees twisted into grotesque shapes. Shadows moved with intention. Every sound, a snapping twig, a rustling branch, the howl of the wind, seemed like the creature calling to me, mocking me. I tripped again and fell into a shallow ditch. Snow and mud covered me. For a moment, I lay still thinking I was done. Then I saw it. The creature, massive and looming, stood at the edge of the fog. Not moving, just watching. The amber eyes burned brighter than ever. It didn't advance. It didn't roar. But the sheer presence was enough to freeze me in place. I understood then it wasn't about killing me yet. It wanted me broken, terrified, alone in the cold. I forced myself to move again, crawling over icy rocks and twisted roots. The sun dipped lower shadows, stretching across the snow. Every step brought new terror, a tree that seemed to lean toward me, a shadow that moved in the periphery snow, crunching without any visible source. At one point I looked back and thought I saw it, the massive silhouette following me along the ridge, keeping just out of reach. I tried to run, but the snow was deep and my body was failing. By nightfall, I stumbled into a narrow valley, partially sheltered by cliffs. I collapsed, trembling, knife clutched to my chest. The forest around me was silent again. For a brief moment, I dared to hope that I had lost it. But as the fog thickened, I saw a pair of amber eyes glowing from the tree line, reflecting the pale moonlight. And I knew this hunt was far from over. The valley offered some shelter, but no safety. My body was numb from the cold. My legs wobbled beneath me, and my hands were raw from clawing through snow and ice. Yet, I had one goal: survive. The amber eyes were still there, glowing from the tree line, unmoving, unblinking. The creature wasn't rushing. It didn't need to. Every instinct I had screamed at me. It was patient, intelligent, unstoppable. I scanned the valley and spotted a narrow path leading down toward a logging road I had glimpsed earlier. My mind raced. Could I make it? Would it allow me to leave? I ran. Every step was agony. Snow sank beneath my boots. Branches tore at my jacket and face, and all the while I could hear the soft crunch of snow behind me, keeping pace. It never roared. It didn't need to. Its presence alone was enough to make my heart pound like a drum. I tripped over a root and fell hard. Pain shot through my leg, but I pushed myself up, adrenaline carrying me forward. The valley narrowed, cliffs rising on either side. It was a trap, I could feel it. The creature knew the terrain better than I did. Then I saw movement, not ahead, above. Between the trees on the cliffside, its massive silhouette appeared almost impossibly tall. It was watching me, calculating, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, it wasn't above me. This time, I reached the logging road at dawn. My boots were soaked, my body exhausted, but the sight of tire tracks and distant power lines filled me with hope. I ran blindly down the path, screaming, calling for anyone at all, and then I stopped. The sound of snow crunching had vanished. The forest behind me was eerily silent. My chest heaved. I dared to look back. Nothing. No eyes, no shadow, no movement. Just the quiet frozen trees swaying in the morning wind. I made it to the ranger station. They found me hours later, delirious, frostbitten, shaking uncontrollably. When I told them about the creature, the footprints, the amber eyes, the broken trees, and twisted branches, they looked at me like I was insane. But I know the truth. The tracks in the snow aren't random. The creature isn't just a legend. It's real. It's patient. It's intelligent. And somewhere in forests, just like these, it still hunts. I survived. But I am changed. Every snowfall, every whisper of wind through the trees makes me remember it is out there, watching, waiting, always learning. And I know someday it will hunt again. I was sent to investigate a series of missing persons reports in the highlands, remote mountain villages that had seemingly vanished overnight. The first clue was a lone snow-covered road leading to nothing. The signs of life ended abruptly: smokeless chimneys, frozen gardens, abandoned tools. The village of Grey Pine should have been lively at this time of year. Children playing in the snow farmers, tending livestock, smoke curling from chimneys. Instead, the streets were silent, empty, and suffocatingly still. I parked my vehicle and stepped into the snow. My boots crunched on the frozen ground. At first, I thought perhaps the villagers had simply fled for work for safety. But then I saw the tracks. Massive footprints pressed deep into the snow. Barefoot, nearly a foot wide. Too long for any human. Too precise for a bear. They led through the village square, past the abandoned homes, and into the surrounding forest. Something or someone had walked through the village deliberately, and there was no sign of struggle, except for the eerie absence of life. I entered one of the houses. Doors left ajar. Tables set for meals that would never be eaten. Personal belongings scattered. And then I noticed the walls scratched, clawed, almost ritualistic. Symbols carved into the wood, spirals, jagged lines, and deep gouges I couldn't understand. A low growl came from the woods beyond the village. I froze. The sound was too deliberate, too measured to be an animal. I backed out of the house slowly, radio in hand, but the signal was dead. It wasn't interference. The forest was swallowing all contact with the outside world. I followed the footprints to the edge of the forest. They stopped abruptly at the base of a steep hill. Around the clearing, trees had been stripped of bark and scratched deep with massive claws. Branches arranged unnaturally, almost like markers. Then I saw movement. Between the shadows of the pines, a figure emerged. Massive, broad-shouldered, covered in dark, matted hair. Its eyes glowed amber, reflecting the pale sunlight. It didn't roar. It didn't charge. It simply watched, intelligent and patient, as if it had been expecting me. I stumbled back, slipping on ice, my heart hammered. I realized the truth. In a cold, sinking moment, the villagers hadn't left. They hadn't been killed. they had been taken, and whatever had done this was still watching me. I couldn't stay at the edge of the forest any longer. The creature had been watching me from the shadows, its amber eyes gleaming like fire in the dim sunlight. I had to know what had happened to the villagers if there was any hope at all. The snow crunched beneath my boots as I followed the faint tracks leading into the dense pine forest. The air was heavy, almost oppressive, and every sound seemed amplified, a branch snapping, the whisper of wind, the distant creak of ice. I was certain it was tracking me, learning my every movement. The tracks led to a small clearing. At first glance, it appeared empty, but then I noticed signs, footprints around a circle of broken trees, remnants of smoke from small fires, half-buried tools. Whoever or whatever had done this was organized, intelligent. It wasn't mindless. It wasn't random. I bent down to inspect the ground. Small objects had been scattered in a pattern, clothing, scraps of food, and human hair. I swallowed hard, my stomach twisting. The villagers weren't just gone. They had been taken, studied, or worse. A sound froze me in place, a low guttural growl, deep and resonant. It came from behind the trees, close enough to feel the vibration in my chest. I froze, barely daring to breathe. The shadow moved. Massive, powerful, unmistakable. It didn't charge. It just watched, pacing slowly, circling the clearing. Its amber eyes locked on mine, intelligent and calculating. I realized it was waiting for me to make a mistake. I pressed on, creeping through the snow, scanning for any signs of life. And then I saw them, small, huddled figures among the trees. At first, I thought I was hallucinating. But no, they were villagers, alive but changed. Their eyes were wide, fearful, almost animalistic. They didn't speak. They didn't move, only stared blankly, occasionally flinching at the shadows. It dawned on me with a shiver. The creature wasn't just hunting. It was experimenting, observing, breaking their minds. And I could see its handiwork in their vacant eyes. Suddenly, movement in the tree line caught my attention. The creature had returned, massive and silent, stepping carefully over snow and branches. It didn't rush, didn't roar, but every instinct screamed at me. It was deciding whether I belonged in its world. I backed away slowly, trying not to make a sound. The villagers remained huddled, frozen in fear. I realized if I panicked, I'd become another experiment, another mind broken and trapped in the forest. I needed a plan. Every step had to be deliberate, every breath measured. The forest had become a cage, and the creature was the warden. And somewhere deep in the shadows, I could feel its presence, studying me, learning me, waiting for the perfect moment. I didn't know if I could save the villagers, but one thing was certain. I had to survive long enough to tell someone about this horror. The forest had become a trap. Every step I took seemed to echo through the trees. Yet the snow muffled the sound, and still I felt it. The creature, watching, learning, calculating. Its amber eyes were everywhere, catching the light between the trunks, reflecting off patches of ice, burning into my mind like fire. I had no plan, no weapons, no reinforcements. Only a survival knife, a dwindling sense of hope, and the knowledge that I was being hunted. I pressed forward toward the small cluster of villagers I had spotted yesterday. Their eyes were still vacant, still frozen, in fear. I called out softly, trying not to startle them, but the creature responded first. A branch snapped behind me, then another, then a series of deliberate steps too heavy, too precise to be natural. I turned, and it was there. Massive, towering black fur, blending into the shadows, muscles coiled like a spring. Its eyes locked onto mine, and I realized this wasn't a hunt for food. This was a game, a test, and I was the prey. I ran. Branches tore at my clothes. Roots tried to trip me, and the snow burned my lungs. But every turn I took, the creature seemed to anticipate. It moved with patience, intelligence, strategy. Not randomly, not blindly. Every step was calculated, every angle considered. I stumbled into a shallow ravine and hid behind a fallen log, trying to catch my breath. My hands were shaking. My vision blurred from cold and fear. The snow around me was disturbed not footprints, but deep impressions, as if the creature had knelt, observed, and left again. Minutes felt like hours. I peeked over the log. The villagers were still there, huddled together, watching. Their eyes flickered toward me, recognition and terror mingled in their gaze. And then I saw it. The creature wasn't moving toward them or me. It was circling, invisible yet omnipresent, marking its territory, controlling its prey, toying with us. I understood then running blindly would kill me. Fighting would kill me. Even screaming would bring certain death. The only chance I had was to outsmart it. I looked around, scanning the ravine for anything that could help. Icicles, loose rocks, tree branches, enough to set a trap. If I could make it think I was retreating one way while I moved another, maybe I could reach the villagers and escape. Every move had to be precise, every sound measured. I was no longer just surviving. I was playing the hunter's game against the hunter itself. I set a decoy, a pile of rocks and snow, leaving tracks leading away from the ravine. Holding my breath, I slipped into the shadows, inching closer to the villagers. My heart hammered as the snow crunched softly under my boots. Then I felt a presence behind me, closer than ever. Its breath smelled of wet fur and something metallic like iron. I froze. The amber eyes glared at me through the darkness, and then it waited, patient, calculating, silent. I realized something terrifying. It didn't need to kill to win. It thrived on fear, control, and submission. And I had to survive long enough to escape its game. The forest seemed alive, twisting and shifting with every step I took. The decoy I had left behind worked for now. The creature had paused, studying the fake trail, giving me a small window of opportunity. My heart hammered as I edged closer to the villagers, every nerve on fire. Their eyes flickered toward me as I approached. They didn't speak, they didn't move, but I could see the spark of recognition, the faintest glimmer of hope. I whispered for them to follow, careful to keep my voice low, almost a hiss. We moved slowly through the snow, one by one. Each step was calculated. Every snapped twig sent waves of terror through me. Behind us, I could hear its soft, deliberate steps, circling, testing. It wasn't rushing. It was taunting us, teaching us fear. We reached a narrow pass that led toward the lower valley. I took the lead, knowing the villagers would follow, but every instinct told me the creature wasn't far. I could feel its eyes on my back. I could sense its patience, its strategy, its intelligence. Suddenly, one of the villagers stumbled. The snow beneath them gave way, and they cried out. My stomach dropped. From the tree line, the creature appeared massive, powerful, every muscle coiled with precision. Amber eyes locked onto us, unblinking, intelligent, terrifying. I froze. So did the villagers. The creature stepped forward slowly. It didn't roar. It didn't charge. It simply watched, every movement deliberate, every breath controlled. The air seemed to thicken around us. Then I remembered the decoy. With trembling hands, I grabbed a branch and slammed it against the snow-covered rocks, creating a diversion. It worked. The creature's head tilted and it bolted toward the sound, moving like a shadow among the trees. My heart hammered. This was our chance. We ran. Branches whipped at our faces. Snow sank beneath our boots. I urged the villagers forward, shouting for them to keep moving. The valley opened up ahead, the faint sight of a distant road, power lines, civilization, salvation. But the forest wasn't done with us yet. A branch snapped too close. A shadow moved in the periphery. I glanced back, just for a second, and saw those amber eyes glowing, tracking, waiting. By nightfall, we emerged from the forest, exhausted, freezing, but alive. The villagers were trembling, silent eyes wide with terror. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. Somewhere behind the trees, the creature remained, patient, watching, intelligent. It hadn't chased us to the end. It didn't need to. It had taught us fear, and I knew deep down that one day it would hunt again. The edge of the valley finally appeared through the fog. Civilization, power lines, a distant road, hope. I could barely move muscles, burning lungs, gasping, but for the first time in days, I dared to believe we might make it out alive. The villagers followed silently, their vacant eyes slowly regaining some humanity as they realized we were leaving the forest behind. But every crunch of snow beneath our boots reminded me we were still being watched. I stopped for a brief moment to catch my breath. The forest behind us was quiet, too quiet. And then I saw it standing atop a ridge, partially hidden in shadow. Massive, amber eyes glowing, its black fur blending into the darkness like a living shadow. It didn't move. It didn't roar. It simply stared, watching, judging, patient, calculating. I realized something terrifying. It hadn't chased us all the way because it didn't need to. The fear it instilled, the power it wielded over our minds had already marked us. We kept moving, stepping carefully along the road. The villagers stayed close, silent, trembling. I glanced back once more. The creature remained at the forest's edge, still watching, a guardian of the shadows, a predator that thrived on fear rather than blood. I wanted to believe that leaving the forest meant escaping it, but I knew the truth. Somewhere in the mountains it waited, patient, intelligent, terrifying, and the memory of its amber eyes would haunt me forever. We finally reached the nearest town. Warm lights, the smell of smoke and food, the sound of voices, all foreign, comforting, yet impossible to shake the feeling of being marked. The villagers began speaking softly, their voices hoarse, broken. I realized they had survived, but something in them had changed, and I knew deep in my soul that none of us would ever be the same. The creature didn't need to follow us. It didn't need to strike. Its victory lay in the fear it left behind, in the lingering shadow that would haunt our thoughts forever. I never planned to go looking for that village. In fact, I didn't even believe it existed. Not really. It was one of those campfire stories, told by bored hikers and half-drunk hunters. A whole settlement vanished without a trace. Houses still standing, food still on the tables, but not a single soul left behind. They called it Black Hollow. Most people laughed it off as a myth, but myths don't leave names carved into stone markers. Myths don't show up in 1890 census records and then vanish by 1894. I was a journalist then, the kind that chased ghost stories and missing person cases, mostly to prove them wrong. So, when I stumbled across an old newspaper clipping about Black Hollow, I knew I had to see it for myself. My editor thought I was insane. Maybe I was, because now I wish I'd never gone. The trail that led there wasn't on any modern map. It was a scar through the forest, overgrown and twisted, winding deeper into the Appalachians than I'd ever been. My guide, an old hunter named Morgan, refused to go past the 3rd mile. No one goes past this point, he told me, his voice flat. Not if they want to come back. I laughed it off. He didn't. When I turned to look at him one last time, he was already gone, disappeared down the path like he'd never been there at all. It took me 3 more hours to find the village, and when I did, my breath caught in my throat. The stories hadn't lied. Black Hollow was still there, weathered, rotting, but intact. A dozen small wooden houses crouched beneath a canopy of skeletal trees. Tools lay rusting beside doorsteps. A rocking chair swayed gently on a porch, creaking with the wind. The air was unnervingly still heavy, with the smell of moss and decay. But there were no people, not a single one. I walked through the empty streets, my boots crunching on gravel. Everything felt frozen, as if the villagers had vanished mid-motion. Dishes sat on tables. A sewing project remained half-finished by a window. A child's wooden toy lay abandoned in the dirt. That was the first time I felt it, the watching. At first, I thought it was my imagination. But the deeper I wandered, the stronger it got. A weight pressing on the back of my neck. A presence lurking just beyond my peripheral vision. Something in those trees was alive. Something was waiting. I found the well in the center of the village just before sunset. Its stones were slick with moss, the water black and silent. A carved wooden post beside it bore a single word etched deep into the wood in jagged, desperate letters. They took us. I froze. The wind died. The forest went silent. And from somewhere far beyond the tree line came a sound that didn't belong to the woods, deep, guttural, almost human. But not quite. It was a call, and it wasn't alone. That was when I realized the stories about Black Hollow were wrong. The villagers hadn't simply disappeared. They had been taken. I don't remember deciding to run. I just moved. My instincts took over, and before I realized what I was doing, I was sprinting away from the well, away from that carved warning, away from the sound I couldn't explain. But no matter where I turned, I was still in the village. It was like the place shifted around me. I circled the same weather-beaten cabins, past the same warped fences, stumbled over the same fallen cart again and again. My map was useless. My compass spun lazily in my hand. as if the needle had forgotten north. And always, there was that feeling, that presence, watching, following, studying. By dusk, I had forced myself to slow down. My breathing was ragged, my legs trembling. Panic was going to get me killed faster than anything else. I needed to think. I returned to the main square and climbed onto the well's stone rim to get a better view. The village was small, maybe a dozen homes, a blacksmith's shed, a church leaning sideways on its foundation. The forest swallowed everything beyond an endless ocean of pines and shadow. And then I saw them, symbols, carved deep into the trees surrounding the village. Not letters, not anything human. Twisted looping marks that spiraled and intersected like some ancient language. Some were high above my head, clawed into the bark by something tall, far taller than me. I followed the markings deeper into the woods, keeping my distance, careful not to make a sound. That's when I heard it again. A whistle, not bird song, not wind. A whistle, low, deliberate, mimicking a human tune, but just wrong enough to freeze my blood. It answered from somewhere else, then another, and another. They were communicating. I ducked behind a tree and stayed there, barely daring to breathe. The sun had dipped below the horizon, now bleeding the last light from the forest. And in that twilight glow, I saw movement between the trees. A shape massive, covered in coarse, dark hair, its arms swinging low, its stride impossibly smooth and silent. Then another shape, and another. They moved with intent, circling the edge of the clearing, never stepping into the open, never showing themselves fully. But I saw enough to know these weren't bears, or wolves, or anything science could name. They were watching me, herding me, studying me. I turned back toward the village and froze. Something had changed. The doors I'd left open were now closed. The toy I'd kicked aside earlier now sat perfectly upright. And near the well, there was something new, a long strip of animal hide pinned to the ground with sharpened sticks. Symbols, the same ones carved into the trees, had been etched into its flesh. A message, a warning, or an invitation. I was shaking uncontrollably now. Every instinct screamed at me to leave. But how? The path was gone. The forest had shifted, and those things, whatever they were moving closer. I decided I'd stay one more night. Just one. I'd barricade myself inside one of the cabins and wait for daylight. Then I'd try again. I should have run, because that night I woke to the sound of footsteps inside the house. At first, I thought I was dreaming. The creak of floorboards, the soft scrape of something dragging across the wood. It all felt distant, unreal. But then the smell hit me, wet fur, soil blood, and the footsteps stopped right outside my room. I held my breath. My heart slammed against my ribs so violently, I thought it might give me away. Slowly, deliberately, the doorknob began to turn. Click. It opened an inch, 2, and through that gap, something breathed long and heavy, like a predator scenting its prey. Then a massive hair-covered hand slipped through the doorframe claws, curling around the edge of the wood. I don't know how I managed not to scream. The creature didn't enter. It just stood there for what felt like hours, listening, smelling, studying, and then just as silently, it withdrew. The door clicked shut. The footsteps retreated. But I didn't sleep again. I couldn't. because I finally understood what the villagers must have known. Whatever had taken them wasn't a ghost. It wasn't a myth. It was real, and it was still here. And now, it knew I was here too. I didn't move until the first hint of dawn began to smear pale light across the cabin floor. My body ached from tension, every muscle locked in a silent, sleepless vigil. All night I'd listened to the footsteps, pacing outside to the whistles, echoing through the forest to the rhythmic thump, thump, thump of something heavy striking wood somewhere beyond the village. They knew I was there, and they wanted me to know they knew. When the light finally came, I forced myself to leave the cabin. Every instinct screamed at me to stay inside, but I needed to see. Needed to know if it had all been some terrible hallucination born of fear and exhaustion. It hadn't. The first thing I saw was footprints. Massive, deep impressions in the soft earth, circling the cabin like wolves testing a cage. But they weren't alone. Lying at the edge of the clearing, arranged in a perfect ring, were bones, deer, rabbits, something larger I couldn't identify. And in the center of that ring sat a small pile of stones, stacked with unnatural precision. A gift, or a warning, I wasn't sure which. I knew I couldn't stay much longer. My supplies were running low and my nerves were stretched thin. But before I left, I had to know what happened here. I had to understand why this village had been erased from history. And that's when I saw the church. I don't know how I'd missed it before. It sat on a small rise at the far end of the village, its steeple broken and leaning its doors half rotted from rain. Something about it felt wrong. The air was colder there, heavier. As I approached, a sound rose from somewhere. Deep inside, a low hum, almost too low to hear, like the earth itself was groaning. The door resisted me, at first swollen with moisture, but I forced it open with a loud crack. The smell hit me immediately, copper and rot and something ancient. My flashlight beam swept over pews, overturned in chaos, claw marks raked deep into the walls. And then I saw them symbols, hundreds of them, carved into the wood from floor to ceiling. The same looping, spiraling markings I'd seen on the trees, only here they were fresher, newer. Someone or something had been in this church recently. In the center of the room stood a stone altar, and on that altar was a single object that made my stomach lurch: a human skull, bleached white and polished smooth. Its jaw was missing. Its eye sockets were filled with river stones. I stumbled back, my flashlight trembling in my hand. My breath caught in my throat, because behind the altar, etched into the wall itself, was a mural. It showed figures, tall, hunched, covered in hair, surrounding a group of smaller, human-like shapes. The humans were kneeling. The creatures were offering something to them, or taking something away. It was hard to tell which. And above it all, scrawled in jagged English letters, were 3 words. The hollow ones. The sound that followed was unlike anything I've ever heard. It started as a distant rumble, like a landslide far away, and grew into a deep, resonant howl that shook the wooden walls. It was answered by another, and another, until the forest itself seemed to scream. I ran. I don't even remember leaving the church. One moment I was staring at that mural, and the next I was stumbling through the village square, heart-hammering, lungs burning. The howls were closer, now circling me, surrounding me, closing in from every direction. And then I saw them, 3 of them, maybe 4. towering over the rooftops, eyes glowing amber in the early morning light. They moved on two legs, but hunched low, their arms nearly dragging the ground. One sniffed the air and turned its head toward me, baring teeth too flat to belong to a predator and too human to belong to a beast. I froze. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Then the largest one stepped forward and spoke. It wasn't a word, not exactly, more like a sound shaped into meaning. But I understood it all the same. Stay. My legs gave out and I fell to my knees. I wasn't prey. I wasn't a threat. I was a guest, an experiment, a witness. And whatever the hollow ones were, they weren't finished with me yet. Because as they drew closer, surrounding me in a ring of fur and shadow and breath, I realized the most horrifying thing of all. They didn't want to kill me. They wanted me to understand. I should have run. I should have fought, screamed something. But in that moment, surrounded by towering shapes that blotted out the rising sun, I realized how hopeless escape truly was. They weren't just faster or stronger. They were smarter. They had been herding me from the start, guiding me here. I wasn't captured. I was chosen, the largest one, the same hulking figure that had spoken that one impossible word, stepped closer. Its head tilted, studying me with unnerving curiosity. Up close, its face was a monstrous paradox. Deeply human eyes, sunken into a bestial skull. Coarse black fur, matted with mud and blood nostrils, flaring as it breathed me in. It raised one massive clawed hand and pointed into the forest. Come. This time, the sound was clearer. A command, not an invitation. They didn't drag me. They didn't restrain me. They simply walked slow, deliberate steps into the trees, and I followed, because the alternative felt worse than death. We moved in near silence, save for the occasional whistle, echoing through the canopy, a language that was almost music, almost speech. The deeper we went, the more unnatural the forest became. Trees twisted in ways that defied gravity. Moss glowed faintly under the dim light. And carved into nearly every trunk were those same looping symbols, growing denser, older, more frantic. After what felt like hours, the trees opened into a clearing. And that's where I saw it. It was a pit. A vast circular hollow carved into the earth, easily 50 feet across and deeper than I could see. Around its rim stood dozens of wooden totems, each carved into the likeness of a human face twisted in fear or agony. The air here was thick, heavy with the stench of decay, and something older, something metallic and sharp that stung the back of my throat. But it wasn't the pit or the carvings that made my stomach churn. It was the clothes. Piles of them, dresses, boots, children's toys, rusted jewelry, all scattered in heaps around the hollow. Hundreds of pieces, maybe thousands. The villagers of Black Hollow had come here, and none of them had left. The largest creature, their leader, I assumed, stepped to the edge of the pit and turned to face me. It beat its chest once, then pointed down into the darkness. See, I hesitated. My instincts screamed no. Every part of my body wanted to run, but something deeper, curiosity, terror, or maybe the hypnotic weight of their gaze pushed me forward. I crawled to the edge and looked down. At first, I saw nothing but blackness. Then slowly, shapes began to emerge. Not bodies, not bones, but structures, wooden beams, ladders. Stone walls carved into the earth itself. It wasn't a pit, it was a city beneath the forest, built by hands far larger than any humans, lit by faint, flickering fires deep below. And in the dim glow I saw them people, dozens of them, maybe more, alive, moving, silent. They weren't screaming, they weren't fighting, they were worshipping. I stumbled back, my heart hammering against my ribs. The creature caught me before I felt its grip, surprisingly gentle but unyielding. It stared into my eyes, and for a moment, a terrifying, fleeting moment, I understood. This was not random violence. This was ritual. They hadn't taken the villagers to eat them or kill them. They had taken them to keep them, to shape them, to make them part of something older than memory. The hollow ones weren't monsters. They were priests, and we, humanity, were their offering. The leader spoke again, that guttural sound vibrating deep in its chest. I didn't understand the words, but I understood the meaning. You belong here now. My vision blurred. My knees gave way. And as they lifted me gently, reverently, and began carrying me toward the edge of the pit, I realized that the story of Black Hollow was never about a disappearance. It was about an ascension, one that had claimed hundreds before me. And now it was my turn. They carried me like a relic, not a prisoner, not prey, but a vessel. Their hands rough and calloused like tree bark held me firmly, yet carefully, as if I might break before I reached whatever destiny awaited below. I tried to fight it. Every muscle screamed, every instinct begged for escape, but my body betrayed me. My limbs were weak, trembling. My breath came in ragged gasps. Maybe it was the fear. Maybe it was the forest itself seeping into me. The pit grew closer. The chanting began again, a low rhythmic pulse that shook the air and crawled beneath my skin. Dozens of the creatures gathered at the edge, their yellow eyes glowing in unison. As they moved, I saw carvings on their bodies, crude sigils etched into their flesh, some fresh and bleeding, others scarred over countless times. They weren't savages, they were devotees, and I was their newest disciple. The descent was slower than I expected. A spiraling wooden ramp, reinforced with massive stones, wound down into the earth. Torches lined the walls, flickering with greenish flame that filled the tunnel with a sickly glow. Every step down felt like a step back in time from the world of men into the realm of something far older, far purer, and far more terrifying. The deeper we went, the louder the chanting grew. It wasn't human, too guttural, too alien, but its pattern was unmistakable worship, praise, sacrifice. And then I heard English. "Welcome." I froze. The word echoed faintly from somewhere below. My pulse spiked. Had I imagined it? No, there it was again, clearer this time. "Welcome home." The tunnel opened into a colossal cavern. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen. An underground city carved from ancient stone and illuminated by hundreds of fire pits. Structures rose like temples, adorned with bones, hides, and symbols I didn't recognize. Bridges of twisted wood and sinew spanned bottomless chasms. And everywhere were people. Some wore torn remnants of modern clothing, others dressed in primitive furs and rags, but all shared the same hollow, glassy stare. Their eyes followed the creatures with a reverence that bordered on madness. They didn't scream. They didn't resist. They simply obeyed. One of them, a man with a long tangled beard and a jacket that might have once been a park ranger's, stepped forward. His face was gaunt, his voice hoarse, but his smile, it was genuine. "You're one of us now," he whispered. "Don't fight it. It's easier if you don't." I shook my head. "Where are we? What is this?" He looked up, eyes shimmering in the torchlight. "The cradle, the place before men, before cities, before gods. They were here first, and they will be here long after we're gone." "They," I whispered. He pointed to the towering figures watching from the shadows. "The keepers, the old blood. We call them Bigfoot, but that's just a word. They call themselves something older, something that means the first ones." I stared around the cavern at the chanting, the worship, the pit where all this had begun, and a horrifying realization began to bloom in my chest. This wasn't a prison. It was a sanctuary, and humanity. We were the intruders. Days or maybe weeks passed. Time lost all meaning down there. I tried to resist, to plan escape, but the deeper I breathed the thick, musky air of that place, the more I felt my thoughts slipping away. Memories of home blurred. My name grew harder to recall, and always in the dark corners of my mind, a single word pulsed like a heartbeat. Belong. Sometimes I thought I heard the villagers whispering in their sleep. Sometimes I thought I heard my own voice joining theirs. And one night, as the chanting reached a fever pitch, I caught my reflection in a pool of black water. My eyes weren't human anymore. They glowed faintly yellow like theirs. I don't know how long I've been here. I don't know if anyone will ever find this place, or if this message will ever reach the world above. But if it does, if you're reading this, do not look for Black Hollow. Do not follow the whispers. And if you see the eyes watching you from the tree line, run. Because once they choose you, there's no going back. The villagers didn't disappear. We didn't die. We became something else. And soon you will too. I was never the type to believe in monsters. Ghost stories, sure. Urban legends, maybe. But monsters, real, living, breathing creatures, lurking in the dark, that always felt like something invented for late-night campfire tales. That was before last summer, before the screams, before I learned that sometimes the stories are warnings, and sometimes they're not told soon enough. It started with a message from my best friend Ryan. "Dude, you're gonna love this," he wrote. "Found an old campground deep in the Cascades, totally abandoned, like untouched for decades. Let's check it out." Ryan had a habit of dragging me into weird adventures, forgotten mines, ghost towns, shuttered motels. Usually they ended with a few cool photos and a story to tell. I wasn't excited this time, but I was restless. My job was going nowhere. My girlfriend had just dumped me, and I hadn't felt alive in months. "Fine," I texted back. "When?" "Next weekend. Bring your camera and a strong stomach." I didn't ask what he meant by that. We were 4 in total. Me, Ryan, his cousin Claire, and Jake, a quiet, bearded guy from Ryan's hiking group. We packed enough supplies for a 3-day trip and drove 6 hours north, deeper into the mountains than I'd ever been. There were no signs for any campground, no mention online. It was as if the place had been erased from every map. We parked where the road ended, a dead forest road, overgrown with moss and roots, and hiked Another 3 miles. The deeper we went, the quieter everything became. The usual sounds of the woods, birds, insects, even the wind vanished. All that was left was the sound of our boots crunching through the underbrush and the occasional nervous joke from Ryan. "Place gives me Blair Witch vibes," Claire said, glancing at the trees. "Exactly," Ryan grinned. "Perfect for a story." It was late afternoon when we found it. The old campground was still there. Rusting picnic tables, collapsed cabins, a dried-out well at the center. A faded wooden sign barely clung to a tree, its letters almost unreadable. Camp Wildwood, Est, 1968. No one had been here in decades, but someone or something had been here recently. I noticed it first, a pile of bones near the fire pit, too clean to be old. Animal, maybe. But something about the way they were arranged, neatly, deliberately, made my stomach tighten. Jake shrugged it off. "Coyotes," he said. But there were no bite marks, no scatter. Just a perfect circle of bleached white ribs and skull fragments. We set up camp anyway, because that's what idiots in horror stories always do. By nightfall, a fog had crept in, wrapping the campground in a cold, damp shroud. The air smelled like wet pine and old earth. We built a fire and sat around it, passing a flask and trading ghost stories, mostly to distract ourselves from the creeping sense that we weren't supposed to be there. At one point, Claire froze mid-sentence. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. We all went silent. Somewhere beyond the tree line, deep in the darkness, came a sound, low, guttural, and far too heavy to be human. It wasn't a bear's growl. It wasn't an elk. It was something deeper, something primal. Jake clicked off his headlamp. Probably nothing, he said. But his voice wasn't convincing. The sound came again, closer. This time, it wasn't a growl. It was a breath, long and slow, like something sniffing the air. Ryan tried to laugh it off. "Maybe it's a raccoon," he joked. No one laughed. We stayed up later than we'd planned, firelight flickering against our anxious faces. When we finally retreated to our tents, the forest was dead silent again. Not a leaf stirring, not a single insect humming. I couldn't sleep. Every time I started to drift, I heard its faint footsteps circling the edge of our campsite. Heavy, deliberate, and every so often, the faintest click like claws tapping against wood. At one point, I swear I saw a shadow move between the trees, massive, upright, taller than any man I'd ever seen. I blinked, and it was gone. I told myself I imagined it, that I was just tired, that nothing was out there. But deep down, I already knew something was watching us. Morning came gray and cold. The fog still clung stubbornly to the ground, and the air felt heavier somehow. Claire was the first to speak. "Did anyone else hear something last night?" We all had. No one wanted to admit it. Ryan tried to lift the mood with coffee and bad jokes, but it was clear we were all on edge. That's when Jake called out from the edge of the clearing, "Guys, you need to see this." We followed his voice and found him standing near the tree line, staring at the ground. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then my stomach dropped. Footprints, dozens of them. They were enormous, at least 16 inches long, wide and deep, like something heavy had passed through. The toes were distinct human-like, but wrong, almost prehistoric. They circled the entire campsite, weaving in and out of the fog before disappearing into the forest. Ryan knelt to measure one with his hand. "No way," he muttered. "No damn way." "This isn't funny," Claire snapped. Jake didn't say anything. He just stared into the woods, his jaw tight. I wanted to leave. I said as much. But Ryan insisted we stay. "We came for an adventure," he said. "This is the adventure." Looking back, that was the moment we should have packed up and run. But we didn't. And that's why 3 days later, only 2 of us made it out of Camp Wildwood alive. We spent the rest of that morning arguing about what to do. Claire wanted to leave immediately. She'd been shaking since we found the footprints. Jake was silent, but clearly agreed. Ryan, of course, insisted we stay. "Think about it," he said, pacing around the fire pit. "We might have just found evidence of Bigfoot. Actual evidence. We can't just walk away now." "Evidence," Claire snapped. "Are you insane? That's not evidence, that's a warning." I didn't say anything. I was staring at the footprints again. They weren't scattered like random tracks. They circled the camp in a wide, deliberate loop, like something had been studying us. In the end, we compromised. We'd stay one more night, but we'd pack up at first light. None of us felt good about it, but Ryan's excitement was contagious, and maybe we were just overreacting. At least that's what I kept telling myself. The day passed in a tense haze. We explored the abandoned cabins, though they were mostly just hollow shells. Rotten wood, rusted hinges, scraps of old signs. One cabin still had a few pieces of furniture, but something had torn through the back wall years ago. Inside, I found a child's shoe, tiny, moldy, half buried under leaves. I didn't tell the others. We tried to hike deeper into the forest to see if we could follow the prints, but they vanished after 50 yards, swallowed by thick moss and pine needles. It was like whatever had made them had simply melted into the trees. By sunset, the forest felt different. The silence was heavier, more deliberate. Every rustle, every gust of wind sounded like footsteps. Claire refused to leave the campfire. Even Jake, the stoic, unshakable Jake, had a hand on his hunting knife all evening. When darkness fell, the air turned cold, colder than it should have been. And then we heard it again, that sound, that breathing, slow, deep, animal. It came from the tree line just beyond the glow of the fire. None of us spoke. None of us moved. The breath grew louder, closer, circling us just like the footprints had. Then came the whistle. It was soft, almost playful, but wrong, too low, too human. A mocking imitation of a bird call, repeated again and again from somewhere in the dark. Claire clutched my arm. "It's mimicking us," she whispered. Ryan laughed nervously. "Maybe it's just an owl, but owls don't walk on 2 legs, and they don't whistle back when you speak." It must have been past midnight when Jake decided he'd had enough. He grabbed his flashlight and rifle and stomped toward the sound. "I'm ending this," he growled. "Jake, wait," I shouted, but he was already gone. We listened to his footsteps fade into the dark. Then silence. Then crack! The sound of wood splintering. A shout. Then nothing. "Jake!" Claire screamed. Ryan grabbed his light and ran after him. Against every instinct I had, I followed. The forest was pitch black beyond the firelight, our flashlights cutting narrow tunnels of white through the fog. "Jake!" Ryan called again. No answer. Then Claire gasped. "Oh my God." There 20 feet ahead was Jake's flashlight lying on the ground, its beam pointing up into the branches. And next to it, a smear of blood across the snow. But no Jake. Before we could react, a thud echoed from somewhere to our right. Then another. And another. Like footsteps, heavy, deliberate, circling us in the dark. "Back to camp," I whispered. "Now." We turned, and that's when I saw it. Just beyond the reach of our lights, half hidden behind a cluster of pines, something was standing. Massive, broad-shouldered, taller than any man I'd ever seen. Its outline was wrong-hunched, powerful, draped in hair that rippled as it moved. And its eyes, God help me, its eyes. Two pale yellow orbs, reflecting the light, unblinking, locked onto us with a hunger I'll never forget. It didn't move, it didn't charge, it just watched. Ryan swore under his breath. "That's not a bear." We backed away slowly, step by step, until the firelight swallowed us again. Only then did the figure melt back into the dark. Jake never returned. None of us slept that night. We sat by the fire, clutching knives, staring into the blackness. Every branch crack, every gust of wind sent adrenaline surging through my veins. Around 3 a.m., the forest exploded with sound. It started as a growl, low and distant. Then it rose, deepening into something primal and ancient. It wasn't an animal's roar. It wasn't a human scream. It was both, and neither a sound so wrong that it seemed to vibrate the trees themselves. Claire broke down crying. Ryan whispered prayers under his breath. I just stared into the darkness, frozen, waiting for death. The howl echoed 3 times, each one closer, each one louder, and then silence. But the silence was worse, because in it we could hear footsteps, dozens of them. By the time dawn came, we were wrecks, exhausted, terrified, hollow. Jake was gone. Our food supplies were scattered, some torn apart, some missing entirely. And surrounding the campsite were new footprints, bigger, closer. And this time, they weren't circling us. They were closing in. "Pack, now," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. We stuffed everything into our bags as fast as we could. But before we could finish, Ryan stopped dead in his tracks. "Look," he whispered. At the edge of the clearing, 20 feet away, something stood between the trees. The same hulking figure from the night before. But now, there were 3 of them. All of them watching, all of them silent. Claire screamed. That broke the spell. We ran, abandoning gear, leaving the tents flapping behind us. The forest swallowed us, whole branches, tearing at our clothes, lungs, burning as we stumbled downhill. I don't know how long we ran. Hours maybe, but the feeling never left the sense that they were right behind us, just out of sight. And sometimes in the wind, I swore I heard that same low whistle, mocking, following, hunting. We ran until our legs burned and our lungs felt like fire. The forest seemed endless. The same twisted trees, the same choking fog, the same oppressive silence pressing down from all sides. Every so often, I risked a glance over my shoulder. Nothing. But the feeling, that instinctive, animal certainty, told me we were not alone. They were still following. We had no plan, no compass, no idea where we were going. We just moved, stumbling downhill, crashing through underbrush, chasing the faint hope of a road or a river or anything that would lead us back to civilization. But the deeper we ran, the stranger the forest became. The trees grew older here, thicker, gnarled things that seemed to lean inward, their branches knitting together to block the sun. The air smelled wrong, too sour, metallic, like blood on snow. And then there were the carvings. I noticed them first, strange symbols etched into tree bark, spiraling patterns, handprints, too large to be human. Some looked fresh, others were half covered in moss. All of them were clustered around a narrow, barely visible trail leading deeper into the woods. "Keep moving," Ryan hissed, pulling Claire by the arm. "Don't stop." But Claire was staring at one symbol, a rough, almost childlike drawing of a tall, towering figure. Beneath it, a crude depiction of smaller figures on their knees. "Worship," she whispered. "It's worshipping them." By the time we stumbled onto the cabin, the sun was gone again. It appeared suddenly through the fog, a small, rotting structure perched on the edge of a ravine, its roof half collapsed and door hanging crooked on rusted hinges. "Shelter," Ryan gasped. "Just for the night. We'll figure the rest out in the morning." Every instinct I had screamed against it, but exhaustion had stripped us of options. We barricaded the door with whatever we could find and collapsed inside, too tired to speak. The interior was worse than I expected. Old bunk beds covered in mold-shattered glass on the floor. Claw marks raked deep into the wooden walls. In one corner, a stack of bones, small ones, human-shaped, lay piled neatly, almost reverently. Claire refused to sit near them. I couldn't blame her. As the night crept in, the forest came alive again. Not with animals we hadn't heard a bird or squirrel since the first night, but with footsteps, slow, heavy, deliberate. They circled the cabin the same way they'd circled the camp. Then came the whistles, soft, mocking, closer. Ryan clutched the rifle, his hands shaking. "They're toying with us," he muttered. The walls groaned as something brushed past them. A window shattered in the back room. Claire screamed as a massive fur-covered arm, thick as a tree trunk, punched through the gap and clawed at the air inside. "Go upstairs," I yelled. We scrambled up the narrow staircase to the loft. The floor creaked under our weight, threatening to give way. From below, deep, guttural growls rattled the walls. They weren't trying to break in anymore. They were testing us. At some point, the noise stopped. The silence was worse. I don't know how long we stayed up there. Maybe hours. Maybe only minutes. But then Claire noticed something strange. The floor beneath us was hollow. A small square cutout hidden beneath a pile of rotting boards. We pried it open. Beneath the loft was a trapdoor leading to a cramped earthen tunnel, pitch black and narrow, but man-made. At first, we thought it was a cellar, but the deeper we crawled, the more it became clear this was something else entirely. The walls were carved with the same symbols we'd seen on the trees. Skulls, human skulls, were embedded into the dirt like trophies, and deeper still, the tunnel opened into a small chamber, a shrine. Dozens of bones were stacked in patterns on the floor. In the center, a massive skull, elongated, ape-like, impossibly old, rested on a stone pedestal. Around it, bundles of animal fur, crude wooden idols, and strange blackened offerings. Claire gagged. "This isn't just some animal," she whispered. "This is a cult." "No," I said, my voice trembling. "Not a cult. A grave." Ryan knelt before the skull transfixed. "It's real," he whispered. "Bigfoot. It's always been real." Then he froze. His eyes widened. "Do you hear that?" At first it was faint, a deep rhythmic thumping, like drums echoing through the earth. Then came the chants. Low, wordless, primal. The sound was coming from above, from outside the cabin. We scrambled back up the tunnel and peeked through the broken window. What we saw will haunt me for the rest of my life. They were everywhere. Not one, not three, dozens, maybe more. Towering shapes moving between the trees, their eyes glinting in the moonlight. They stood in a wide circle around the cabin, swaying slowly, pounding their fists against the ground in unison. And they were chanting. It wasn't human language. It wasn't animal noise. It was something older, a sound that bypassed reason and clawed straight into your primal brain. A song of the hunt, a song of the kill. Claire was sobbing. Ryan had gone pale. I couldn't breathe. And then one by one, they turned their heads, all of them, and stared directly at the window. At us. The first one charged without warning. The cabin shuddered under its weight, timbers splintering as the door exploded inward. Another followed, then another. We bolted for the stairs, leaping over debris as the floor collapsed behind us. "Run!" I screamed. We burst through the back wall and into the night, tearing through the trees with the sound of thunderous footsteps closing in behind us. I could hear them breathing deep, monstrous breaths, feel the vibration of their strides shaking the ground. Claire tripped, screaming as I dragged her to her feet. Something massive slammed into a tree, inches from my head, sending bark flying. Another shape lunged from the darkness, swiping at Ryan. The blow missed by inches, but the force sent him crashing to the ground. We didn't look back. We couldn't. All that mattered now was forward through the thorns, through the darkness, through the endless maze of trees that refused to let us go. And still behind us the chanting rose, louder, closer, like the forest itself was alive, and it wanted blood. I didn't sleep that night, not really. I pretended to lying still in my sleeping bag, eyes shut, heart pounding, but every time the wind shifted, every time a branch snapped, every time an owl called in the distance, my body jolted awake with the same thought. It's watching me. And it was. I felt it before I saw it. Sometime past midnight, as the campfire smoldered into red coals and the mist crept low between the tents, I turned my head slightly and saw it again, standing beyond the tree line, half hidden by a pine trunk, massive and unmoving. Its outline was darker than the darkness itself, but the glint of moonlight caught in its eyes. It wasn't curious. It wasn't confused. It was waiting. I couldn't move. I didn't dare move. My instincts screamed at me to stay still, to stay small, like prey that hadn't been noticed yet. But it had noticed me. The creature took one slow step forward, crunching leaves beneath its weight. I swear the ground trembled beneath it. The smell hit next, a mixture of rotting meat and wet fur, so strong it clawed into the back of my throat. And then it was gone again. One blink and the space between the trees was empty. Had I imagined it? I told myself I had. I needed to believe that. But the next morning destroyed that illusion. We found footprints circling the campsite, enormous, bare, deeply pressed into the mud. They didn't belong to a bear, and no human could make prints that size. They circled the fire pit. They stopped beside my tent, right next to where I had been lying. "Jesus Christ," whispered Hannah, crouching over one of them. It was here. It was right here, watching us, I said. My voice was hollow, foreign to my own ears. All night. We argued about leaving, of course. Caleb was the first to break. He was already stuffing his gear back into his bag before anyone had decided. But the trail back was steep and washed out. Our maps were useless and our phones had died days ago. We could try to hike out blind, but it would take hours, and if that thing was following us, it didn't feel like we were allowed to leave. By the afternoon, the forest had gone eerily silent again. No birds, no bugs, just the whisper of the wind and the sound of our own anxious breathing. That's when the whistling began. It came from somewhere deep among the trees, low and off-key, like a human, trying and failing to mimic a tune. Then it answered from somewhere else, and again, until it felt like the entire forest was alive with whistles. "They're talking," Hannah murmured. "God, I think they're communicating." "They," Caleb snapped. "Don't say they," but she was right. It wasn't one creature. There were more, many more. As dusk bled into night, the whistling stopped. And in the new silence, a different sound took its place. Breathing. Deep, heavy, ragged. Coming from the darkness beyond the tree line. We circled closer to the fire, all four of us, clutching whatever we could find. Sticks, knives, even a broken chair leg. It was pathetic, but it was all we had. And then one by one, the shapes stepped out from the shadows. I counted 3, maybe 4. All taller than any man, broader than any bear. Their fur matted and slick with mud, their eyes reflecting orange in the firelight. They stood just at the edge of the light, as if the glow itself was a barrier they wouldn't cross. The biggest one, the same one I'd seen watching me, took a step forward and growled. It wasn't an animal sound. It was low, deliberate, almost like speech. I realized then, with the terror that rooted me to the earth, that they weren't mindless beasts. They knew what they were doing. They were testing us, and we were trapped. I don't know how long we stood there, frozen in a ring of dying firelight, staring into the eyes of monsters. Seconds, minutes, it felt like eternity. A drawn-out breath before the inevitable. The largest one moved first. It stepped forward, its hulking body blotting out the glow of the embers, and released a sound that still lives in my nightmares. A guttural, vibrating roar that wasn't just heard, but felt deep inside my chest. It was a warning, or a command. I couldn't tell which. "Back up," I whispered, my voice cracking. "Don't run. Just back up." But Caleb panicked. Of course he did. He screamed something incoherent and bolted into the trees. Flashlight beam whipping wildly as he vanished into the dark. The shapes reacted instantly. 2 of them turned and sprinted after him, moving with horrifying speed, faster than anything that size should move. The forest exploded with noise, snapping branches, heavy footfalls, and Caleb's distant, desperate screams. Then silence, just like that. Nothing but the faint hiss of the dying fire and my own ragged breathing. We should have gone after him. We wanted to. But some primal part of my brain, older than language, older than logic, told me that leaving the light meant death. So we stayed huddled close, too afraid to speak, too afraid to breathe too loudly. Time lost all meaning. Hours passed, or maybe minutes, before we heard it again, the whistling. Closer this time, surrounding us. "They're circling," Hannah whispered. "God, they're hurting us." She was right. They weren't just hunting, they were guiding. pushing, like shepherds corralling livestock. Every time we shifted, the whistles shifted too. Every time we tried to edge toward the path, something moved in the darkness to block us. We weren't in control anymore. When dawn finally broke, the world looked unchanged, but everything felt different. Caleb was gone, our food was gone, and the path that had led us into the campsite was no longer there. It was as if the forest itself had rearranged overnight. "We're lost," whispered Hannah, staring into the endless stretch of trees. "They've trapped us here." "No," I said though. I didn't believe it. "We just have to keep moving." So we walked. We walked until our legs burned and our throats were raw. Every direction led us back to the same clearing, the same ruined fire pit, the same 4 sets of footprints pressed deep into the mud. Ours and theirs. It was midday when we saw Caleb again. At first, I thought it was a hallucination, a trick of exhaustion and terror. But no, it was him, hanging upside down from a tree branch 50 feet above us, his eyes open and glassy, his limbs twisted at impossible angles. We didn't scream. There was no sound left in us. Something had placed him there deliberately, like a message, like a warning. We ran after that, not because we thought we could escape. We knew we couldn't, but because doing something was better than standing still and waiting to die. The whistles followed us. The shadows followed us, always behind us, always just out of sight. And then somewhere deep in the woods, I tripped. I hit the ground hard and rolled my head spinning, and that's when I saw it. Not a Bigfoot, not 4 of them, dozens. Some stood on 2 legs. Some crawled on all 4s. Some peered from the branches above like massive hairy vultures. And they all stared at us with the same expression, not hunger, not rage, recognition. They knew us. They had been watching us long before we arrived, and now we were part of whatever this was. I don't remember what happened next. I woke up 3 days later in a hospital bed miles from where we had camped. A hiker had found me wandering a service road covered in mud and blood, muttering nonsense. Hannah and the others were never found. The official report called it an animal attack. The ranger told me it was probably a bear. The sheriff suggested a mountain lion, but I know the truth. I saw them. I heard them. And sometimes late at night when the wind is just right, I swear I can still hear that low, broken whistle echoing through the trees outside my window. They're still out there, watching, waiting, and maybe just maybe looking for me.